Authority has confirmed that it will proceed with an appeal against the acquittal of Nigerian televangelist Timothy Omotoso. He was acquitted last month by the High Court in Gqeberha on 32 charges, including rape and human trafficking. The judge also noting that the prosecutors failed to properly cross-examine the accused or indeed present corroborating evidence. Now, yesterday, Omotoso was voluntarily deported from South Africa just days after being rearrested in East London for contravening the Immigration Act. That arrest was short-lived as he was released due to procedural flaws in the process. The NPA says it's not backing down and remains committed to pursuing justice. But let's unpack it further with the NPA spokesperson, Advocate Mthunzi Mhaga. Thanks as always for coming into studio and giving us your time.
Good afternoon, Michelle, and thanks for having us.
So at the time of his voluntary deportation, had the NPA filed papers to appeal Omotoso's acquittal?
We had started that process on 12 May 2025 when we wrote to the Registrar of the High Court in Gqeberha requesting a clarification of factual findings in order for us to finalize the reservation of questions of law. We made that request, and that request's letter was acknowledged by the Registrar, and an indication was that the judge will be back before the end of the month because she is on retirement.
So if indeed the papers for the appeal had been filed, would it have made things slightly easier for the NPA's appeal? I mean, to keep Omotoso in the country? Or are those two matters completely unrelated?
They are not necessarily related, given the fact that in terms of our legal system, an accused person who is the subject of the appeal does not necessarily have to actively participate in the proceedings, nor is he required to be present during the hearing of the appeal at the SCA. All the parties that are required there or that get to be involved and actively participate, albeit at different stages, it is the legal representative of the accused, the state prosecutors leading the appeal, the 5 judges at the SCA, the judge who presided over the matter in Gqeberha, and the registrar of both the High Court in Gqeberha and the registrar of the Supreme Court of Appeal. So there's no need for him to be present.
Yeah, no, I get that. Does it complicate things? Let's say, for example, the appeal is granted.
Yes.
Does it then complicate things? Because then, of course, he needs to be extradited from Nigeria.
It doesn't necessarily complicate things, but it has a bearing on us moving the process forward swiftly. Because if he was in the country, we would then simply get him summoned to appear in court if the judgment or the order is in our favor. But now we have to proceed with an application for extradition. Fortunately for us, we have an extradition treaty with Nigeria that was signed in 2002, and in March 2004 was ratified. So it has not been revoked. It is there. We are hoping that that process will also not be that protracted. But I need to mention, Michelle, that we are a government that talks to itself. We had engaged Home Affairs, and they explain the fact that Omotoso is illegal in the country. He is an undesirable, prohibited person and therefore should depart. And therefore we could not prevent his departure because, remember, he was cleared by the court and is not a fugitive.
Right, right. In fact, that was going to be my next question, whether if the NPA was in conversation with Home Affairs, whether the NPA would have taken that stance and said, hold on, we want to see what the outcome of this appeal is.
There were engagements to that effect, but the view taken was that he should leave the country because even if you proceed with the appeal process, you've got an undesirable, illegal person in the country. So you can't have that kind of a situation because that's an assault on the rule of law because you have a prohibited individual in the country. You know, so we understood that stance.
Right. The extradition process is lengthy, right?
Yes.
As we have seen in the case of AKA, the 2 brothers who are in
Swaziland.
In Swaziland, thank you. That process has been incredibly lengthy. It's taken us some time, and they are still in Swaziland. They've yet to be extradited.
It's quite a protracted process because it involves both legal and political players in it, because remember, when you extradite, in as much as there will be a legal process in court, there will be executive authority that gets involved, because the minister, for example, is the requesting authority, and the DG is the central authority in facilitating that. There's also Foreign Affairs Department that needs to liaise with the foreign state. So it's quite a protracted, but you'll remember that we have successfully extradited many people. We covered Srin Diwani, we brought him in South Africa. We brought Lomas from the UK. We have succeeded in extraditing, albeit challenging the appeal, Bushiri, in respect of 3 counts for which we sought him. So we are optimistic that it's going to be a swift process, though quite involved.
Yeah, and I suppose that would be the NPA's message to the people who have been impacted by the Omotoso case.
Indeed, NDPP has tried to reach out to the victims. We had a meeting with the Chapter 9 institutions that represent them. We are doing all of this in order to, one, ensure that their rights are safeguarded. Secondly, that the entire criminal justice confidence that people have in it is not tainted.
This must have been a moment of introspection for the NPA, the Omotoso case, especially given what the judge had to say in the decision, that the prosecutors failed to properly cross-examine the accused, failed to present corroborating evidence. Tell us about that moment of introspection.
It deflated us.
Yeah.
It killed us in many ways, because it had a devastating impact in our fight of ensuring that the victims of gender-based violence are protected. It also had an impact in that people now started questioning our prosecutorial capacity in prosecuting these cases. That's why the National Director sanctioned 2 investigative processes. One that looks at the ineptitude of the prosecution team, and the one that looks at the unethical conduct, because there are adverse findings that were made by the judge. Once we conclude that those adverse findings are warranted and justified, we will then proceed to take further disciplinary actions. We are expecting a report in May. We're expecting another report in June. This is an indication that we're trying by all means to ensure that there's consequence management. But in passing, I need to mention that people should not doubt our capacity, because remember last week, Michelle, you guys were reporting and commending us when we successfully prosecuted Jocelyn Smith case, where the victim was well found in case that relates to trafficking in persons for exploitation and kidnapping. We also successfully prosecuted, and a person who was a former police officer was sentenced to 20 years in the Eastern Cape, where he raped a 17-year-old teenager inside a police station when she went there to get assistance. Through the prosecutorial prowess and machinery that we always unleash in these cases, we succeeded. We are sitting at 77% in a conviction rate on these cases that come through our victim-centered approach measure with this Thuthuzela case center. Yes, we understand the uproar, we understand the criticism, but we are demonstrating as well that we are doing a good work in respect of these cases in total. Out of, for example, 10 cases, we would win 7 and lose 3, which is not bad.
Yeah, yeah. When we talk about disciplinary processes for the prosecutors involved, what does that look like?
It means we assembled a team for the ineptitude of the prosecutors. We assembled a team for the unethical conduct. We will then look at what does the NPA Code of Conduct says. What do the ethics of an advocate says? In the ineptitude finding, we look at whether they acquainted themselves well in prosecuting this matter, whether their prosecutorial expertise were unleashed in a manner that should have resulted in a conviction. Once that finding is made, National Art Director is committed to ensuring that disciplinary action will be instituted against those against whom a finding is made.
And at the extreme point of disciplinary action, might that mean dismissal?
In gross misconduct, in gross negligence, that may attract that sanction.
I want to just move away for a moment as we wind up our interview, Mr. Mhaga, and talk to you about the postponement in the Phala Phala case. I'm looking for my notes on the story now. But what we know is that it's been postponed for 3 months due to one of the witnesses being with child, and quite heavily so. I mean, at what point did we know that we were going to court with a witness who would not be able to take part in the case?
My understanding is that it is not a witness, but one of the accused persons who has a medical condition that is peculiar, such that the case had to be postponed to the 15th of September, when all the state witnesses were lined up and the state was ready to present evidence in order to sustain the charges. It is a regrettable and unfortunate situation that unfolded, but there's nothing that the state could do. When a person has a medical condition that is peculiar, that impedes on her ability to defend herself fairly during proceedings, we have no choice but to agree to the postponement.
In a case that took place, the Phala Phala robbery, on the 9th of February 2020, it's now 5 years later. Are we satisfied with that kind of timeline?
Unfortunately, it's a matter that is managed at a regional level. I am not sure to what extent there were delays that can be attributed to the state, but I think there were delays.
Advocate Mthunzi Mhaga, thanks for coming into studio.
You're
It's
welcome.
been good to get your clarity on a whole range of incredibly important stories, particularly that of the appeals process against Timothy Omotoso, the Nigerian televangelist who was voluntarily deported just yesterday.